This is a download from the BBC. To find out more, visit bbc.co.uk/Radio4.
The security of the nation is the biggest responsibility of any government. Everything else comes second. That bit is easy. Deciding how to protect our security is the difficult bit, especially when cuts in spending have to be made. Today, the new National Security Strategy is being unveiled, so we shall know where the government's priorities lie. Do the biggest threats come from terrorists, possibly homegrown, like the suicide bombers who attacked the London Underground, or even cyber-terrorism? Or should we be more worried about some unknown future threat from foreign countries, such as Argentina when they invaded the Falklands in 1982? If it's terrorists, we need intelligence and police. If it's a foreign war, we need soldiers and planes and maybe even aircraft carriers. Whatever it is, it has to be paid for, and tomorrow we'll be told how, what's going to be kept and what's going to be cut. I'm joined by the Home Secretary, Theresa May. Good morning to you.
Good morning, John.
The priority first. Those 4 priorities, are they in list of are they in that order because they are deemed to be more important? So terrorism is most worrying, cybersecurity next, natural disasters next, and then international military conflict next. Is that the order?
Well, no. John, if I can just step back a minute before I specifically address that question and set the scene. As what we're doing, as you said earlier, the first task of government, the most important task of government, is keeping the UK and its citizens safe. And we recognised when we came into government that there was a gap, that we previously governments had looked at defence in isolation from wider security issues. So the Prime Minister set up the National Security Council, met within hours of the government coming into place. He appointed a very senior and respected and experienced civil servant, Peter Ricketts, to be the National Security Advisor. And the National Security Council has been working over the months since to identify the threats that are posed to the UK.
And has come up with those 4 threats.
And has come up with this security strategy,
right,
which identifies a number of threats.
Indeed.
Key among those, yes, are the ones that you have identified: international terrorism, cybersecurity. I'm not going to place these in any particular order in terms of...
So in that case, should we assume that they are equal threats?
Well, I don't think it's terribly helpful at this stage to talk about equal threats or not. What's important is for us to look at the priorities and the areas where we need to, how we should be addressing those. And of course, today we will set the scene, if you like, of the overall strategy. Yeah. Tomorrow in the Strategic Defence and Security Review, you will see how we address those particular threats.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point of my question, isn't it? Because unless you know where the priorities lay, you can't allocate resources, spending to them.
Well, that's part of the process, of course, is to do exactly that, to look at how resources should be allocated among the different threats that we face. We've identified certain priorities within this. That's the role of the National Security Council, because these decisions and tough choices have to be taken. But crucially, what we've been able to do, because of setting up the National Security Council, is to bring together all the different types of threat, if you like, to bring together all the departments and all the ministries that are and ministers that are involved in this, so we can look at this in a much more strategic sense, and much more in the round than has been done by any government previously.
And it will puzzle many people, don't you think, that cyber security is placed alongside terrorism, for instance. I mean, we all assume, and I had thought, tell me if I'm wrong, the government assumes that the greatest threat to this nation is terrorism of one sort or another, whether it's homegrown or international. But cyber security, important, clearly, we need to worry about it, but at the same level?
Well, cybersecurity is a very growing threat. It's a threat to government. It's a threat to businesses.
Yeah, no, I acknowledge that. But the question is it on the same level as terrorism? That's the question I'm asking you.
Well, we have identified this as a new and growing threat to the UK. And you just have to look at some of the figures. In fact, over 50%, just about 51% of the malicious software threats that have been ever identified were identified in 2009.
Yeah, but
so
people get blown to bits by terrorists, don't they? They don't get blown to bits by... So I understand that it's difficult to make these comparisons, but nonetheless, the public regards, and I thought the government regarded terrorism as way above all the other threats. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Well, John, I think you're trying to do something which probably isn't isn't what is right in terms of the overall strategy. The important point about what we've done is identified a number of threats. Within those, there are some very key priority threats, and these are of, you might say, they're of a different nature.
But you put them in order, not me. I mean, we were presented
with...
I
not you personally, said I wasn't going to put them in order, actually.
But we have been given them in this order, and you have not told me, in the course of the last 5 minutes, that actually terrorism is or is not a bigger threat than the cyber security question. And that's what I'm trying to get at, you see, because it just seemed so obvious that it is, and I'm slightly surprised that you're not saying, well, yes, it is.
Well, we do face a very serious threat from international terrorism. That is why we have a threat level that is at severe. It's been severe for some time. It means that an attack is highly likely, and we must all be vigilant, and if we see suspicious activity, report it to the police or the security service. But if I can go back to the very first point you made in your introduction about the overall responsibility of government in keeping the UK and its citizens safe. That means we have to look at the whole picture, and that is what we have been doing.
Sure, all
and
right.
that is what has not been done in the past.
All right, let's look at that whole picture then. If we accept that terrorism is the greatest threat facing the nation, and maybe you'll resign from that, but I don't expect you will. If we do that, then doesn't it seem a little bit odd that your department is taking enormous cuts, some say as much as 30%, and that will mean many fewer police officers, for instance, maybe more money for MI5, but then MI5 don't actually arrest people, do they? The fact is, that money is being cut from your department at the same time as we're spending £5 billion on aircraft carriers when nobody can quite see what they're for.
Well, first of all, John, any figures are until Wednesday, when the Chancellor stands up in Parliament and announces the spending review. Any figures remain speculative at this stage.
But your department is having to take big cuts. We know that, don't we? I mean, you don't have to give me the figure. That would be very nice if you did. But we know your department, the Home Office, is taking big cuts.
I'm sure you'd be overjoyed if I suddenly announced figures to you here rather than waiting for
not ask you a figure, but we know that.
Review.
I mean, we can be grown up about this, can't we? We know that the Home Office is taking big cuts.
Well, what we know is that Labour's legacy was a significant deficit, an enormous deficit that we have to get to grips with. We know that it's right to be dealing with that deficit.
Indeed.
That's not just our view, of course. We've got a number of leading businessmen from Asda, Marks and Spencer's, Microsoft.
No, there's no dispute about the deficit.
Supporting the government in that.
Let's not, if we can, waste time on whether there is a serious deficit and therefore there is a serious problem. The fact is the Home Office budget is going to have to be cut. It does seem a little odd that we may lose large numbers of police officers when the biggest threat to this nation is terrorism.
Well, the point I was coming to, having set the scene about the deficit, is that, of course, government departments are having to play their part in that, and the Home Office will have to play their part in addressing the deficit. But when you talk about policing, we know from reports that have been issued, indeed Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary earlier this summer issued a report which said that 12% could be cut from police budgets without affecting frontline policing.
And then beyond that, it gets difficult, they said, because I saw that as well, of course. And yes, and as you will know, the Police Federation says that up to 40,000 police jobs are at risk.
Well, as I say, any suggestions of particular figures are speculation still at this stage.
But I note you're not denying that.
We say, well, John, what I'm saying is that you have to wait and see what the figures will be when the spending review is announced on Wednesday by the Chancellor of the Exchequer. But we know from reports from HMIC and indeed from others that there is money that can be saved from police spending without affecting frontline policing by dealing with issues like procurement,
so can I take it that you would?
So
can I take it that you would have resisted any cuts that would reduce the number of police officers on active service on the front line?
Well, what I'm very keen to do is to ensure that we free the police up so they have more time to be available to be on the front line.
Though, does it? There was a very direct and specific question.
Because I didn't answer the question in the way that you hoped I would, because I don't talk about any conversations I may or may not have had with the Chancellor or the Chief Secretary, and I don't think that's appropriate to do.
That. I'm just asking you as Home Secretary and therefore the Minister whose job it is to defend the police service, at least I'd have thought that was the job, part of it, you would be prepared to say we really cannot cut the number of police officers on the front line.
I've been very clear, John, in a number of public statements that I've made of two things. First of all, as I've already said, that it is possible for police budgets to save money without affecting frontline policing, and also that by getting rid of a lot of bureaucracy, we should be able to make more time available for police to be where they want to be, which is out there on the streets and visible for people. Now, that is something that, as I say, I've been giving very clear messages to the police and others about the necessity of looking first, in terms of savings, at the very real savings that can be made on issues like forces collaborating together on procurement and things like this, the sort of things that you would hope and expect that they were looking at on a regular basis to make sure that they're getting value for money. Value for money. Value for money.